All right, so this is the Charleston JS React Meetup, and today we're going to talk about Deno and React 18 Alpha. React 18 Alpha announcement, I guess, earlier in June was released, and they're working in a work group fashion to move from React Alpha to a full release. And this version's exciting because it really will be the first release that makes suspense kind of a stable feature in React. And it's been several years in the works to get suspense in, and there is some excitement about that. And there's another side is Deno. Deno is a JavaScript server-side runtime, and I'll be using it to kind of show you how server-side rendering and suspense works in React 18. So ask questions as I go through this, but basically I'm going to step through a working kind of plain Jane React application, make it server-side renderable, and then add suspense. And hopefully it'll make sense as I go. What you see on the screen is an app JSX, which you may be familiar with, and then kind of this index HTML, which reads the, kind of bundled script of your React app and kind of injects it in here. If we look at a file called client JSX, and basically it's pulling down React DOM and your app component, and then it's grabbing document get element by ID app and loading your app component in that component. And we're running right now in Deno. And if we go over and open a browser tab, we'll see our hello world. What's pretty nice, that's just basic React, like React 15, 16, and 17. But when you check the dev console, you'll get this warning that says that, React DOM.render is no longer supported in React. Use create root instead. And create root will give you some of the React 18 features. So what we want to do in our first kind of transition is remove the old render method here. And we're going to add this new create root function from React DOM, still passing it the document.get element by ID. And then in that root function, we'll call app. And I'm going to make sure my server restarts just by flipping it on down at the bottom. And then once that loads, we still get hello world, but now we've got that warning gone away. So now we're running in React 18, but we really don't have the ability to take, we don't have it set up to take full ability of the suspense feature and the server-side rendering feature. We are just managing React on the client side. So what we're going to do is step through that. First, we're going to make React server-side renderable. So we'll render it and just keep note of where we are performance-wise. So if we refresh this, and I've got cache disabled, we've got, kind of this download the document, and then we've got the download of the script to paint this hello world. So with server-side rendering, we're actually going to generate the HTML and the React content on the first pass when it actually requests the root, and that'll come down. Then we'll download the client, and it'll still take a little bit of time to download, but then it'll rehydrate the kind of static rendered HTML. So what we have to do is get rid of the index HTML file out of our public. We're going to get rid of that, and we're going to create an HTML component. So we're going to create this component called html.jsx. And this HTML component is going to really be like an HTML file in JSX. And I'm just going to copy and paste it because I think we've all seen an HTML file before. And this is what it looks like as a React component. So we have this function that we're exporting as HTML, and it's going to take assets, children, and title. Children is what will be in the inner tag area or the content area of this, and this HTML component will wrap around that content and just put it here. And it's going to name our title of our page. So instead of React, it'll be whatever we give it. And then it's going to also create the script tag that'll pull in our client code dynamically. So it's going to essentially replace this index.html. So I can delete that. And then we're going to go into our app and we're going to import HTML from html.jsx like that. And just to make this a little bit easier to read, because I'm going to add some stuff later, I'm going to create this function called content, and it's a React component. So it's going to just return some content, right? Hello, SSR. And then in our app, we're going to do HTML and set the prop assets equal to the assets prop of this app. And then we're going to set a prop title equal to SSR rules, right? Because that's fun. And then we're going to include our content. Like that. Okay, so that makes our app actually render a whole HTML page. So we have to change two places. One is when we hydrate the client.js file, we need to change that a bit. We need to change how that works to tell it that we want to hydrate, not inject. So we're going to use hydrate root, which is a function from React DOM. And instead of this create root and render, we're just going to call hydrate root and give it the whole document, not the app ID, but the whole document, and say, you know, just inject our app as a full HTML page. And then we're going to pass in the prop and give it this asset manifest object to handle our assets, which will be the client.js file. But it could also be style sheets and can be any other things that you want to attach to your header of your index HTML or your HTML component. So that's what we need to do there. Now we have to change the server a little bit. And we're going to use a component, this render.js component. So the nice thing about Deno is Deno compiles your JSX. It compiles it as part of its runtime, just like it compiles TypeScript. So you don't need an extra way to compile your JSX or convert your node code to JSX code, et cetera. You don't need like Babel or things like that to transpile. So we're just going to import React from React. And we're going to import server from React DOM server. And then we're going to import our app from components app.jsx. Okay. So that's the first piece. The second is we're going to define our assets. And it'll be a client.js. And then we're going to give it a path where to find that. And that's scripts.client.js. And finally, we're going to implement our function render, and it's going to take a URL and a response object. And we're going to create our HTML. And we're going to pass in app assets like that. And then we're going to say response.send HTML. Okay. So with server render to string, we give it a React component and it's going to create all the HTML from that. And then we're going to send that component just like we would send any kind of HTML on Express. So that's our render function. Now we just have to add that to our server. So we go to our server and we import render from render.jsx. And we're going to add a handler for that app.get root request response. And then we want our response type to be text.html. And then we're going to just call render and we'll pass in the URL of the request and the response object. Okay. Now we're going to fix any typos. There's one typo I have in the import map. So we use import maps in Deno, and we're not mapping React DOM server. So we want to map that to this ESM repository. Alpha server. So that's one typo. And then the other thing is in our build script, when we run the server, we need to tell it where the import maps are. Import map equals import map.json. Okay, those are the two things that I know needs changed. Okay, cool. So that's a good sign. So we pulled down React DOM and React DOM server version 18. And so now hopefully, yep. All right. Hello, SSR. So that's pretty cool. So we got server side rendering, but when it rehydrated, it went away. So let's see what could be going on there. Cannot read property client JS of undefined. And when it's replacing the contents, something's happening. And let's see what that could be. Error occurred during hydration. Okay. So let me back up. The render, the hard part, the server side work. So let's go on our client JS. And we're doing hydrate root, React DOM. Let's see, that looks good. Document, assets. Maybe I have asset manifest misspelled.
Yep, that's it. It says main fest.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Let me just restart this for now. Okay, cool. So let's go to the network tab. Okay, so we got our document, it had the HTML in it, and then we got our client and it rehydrated. Let's look at the console. This is just a weird error with my Grammarly plugin, and I don't know why it's doing that. Maybe Grammarly uses React or something, but that's nothing regarding this demo. Okay. So that is React server-side rendering. Now, it's great. It's super fast for demos, but in the real world, it kind of breaks down a little bit because what happens is it has to, in order for the page to be active, it still has to download 1.2 meg to be fully active, right? So what happens is you see the page, but you can't really do anything until the hydration bits happen. So Suspense is, there's two pieces that are going to help with that. One is Suspense and the other is called server components. And server components is coming in a later version of React that will really help the data side. But I'll be able to demo the Suspense part today, and I think it'll give you an idea of how just that piece can make a difference. So what we have to do in order to demo that is we need to kind of create a time delay. And instead of like calling a database and waiting, I'm just gonna, you know, really create a fake time delay in the rendering part of the application, so you can kind of see how it paints one bit but doesn't paint the other. So I'm going to use this create server data and create like a data provider. And I'll call data equals create server data. And all this function is doing is like timing out for 2000 seconds and passing some fake data to a data provider. And I'll just go ahead and import it, even though we haven't created it yet. And then go ahead and do the wrapping. So we're going to wrap our app with our data provider and then set the data equal to data. And this is basically like the quickest way I can show this without being, you know, super time consuming and annoying. So we've got our data provider. We're going to create a data component that's just a React context implementation. So if you've worked with React context, this should look pretty normal. So basically, it's just a placeholder to get fake data. So we've got create context and use context. We instantiate the data context, calling create context, passing null. And then we export a data provider and it wraps the value of data and does the children with the pass through. And then our function use data just basically grabs the use context, puts data context in it, and then it calls the read function and then returns this fake data. So and it's going to wait for 2000 milliseconds before it returns. So this is just a really simple way to kind of block the rendering of the component. And we're going to create a lazy component that will be our suspense candidate. Lazy component.jsx. And this lazy component will just be a really awesome image of Peter from Family Guy doing an awesome roadhouse kick. So that'll be cool. Okay. So now we want to implement suspense. So I think I've got everything set up now to implement it. We can go to our app JSX file. And what we want to do is pull down suspense and lazy. So we're actually, when I say suspense, we're also going to lazy load the component, which is code splitting, right? So we'll lazy load the component instead of directly importing it. So we'll do const suspense and lazy, and we'll grab those from React. And then we'll load our lazy component dynamically. Lazy component equals lazy. And then we just use a dynamic import. And we choose lazy component.jsx. Okay. And now in our content, we're going to wrap our suspense. And we want to give suspense a fallback component. And this renders when the lazy component has not loaded. So we'll just put loading in here. You can do a spinner or whatever. And then inside our content block is where we will put our lazy component. So the API is pretty much the same as it was in 17, I think. But now we can implement it on both the server and the client. So I think we've got everything here. Hopefully, let's see if we get a message. Yeah. Okay, so it's broken. So basically, what's going to happen is with this import, it's going to look for scripts lazy component.jsx. And if we go to our server, we'll see that we don't have an endpoint for that. So that's what we have to do, is we have to bundle that. We have to code split, basically. We have to bundle from that component, and then we need to return that in our server. So we'll say const lazy and await, and we'll bundle components lazy component .jsx, and then we'll just create a new endpoint that's lazy component .jsx, and we're going to pull the bundle from lazy.files Deno bundle, and we're going to send that as JavaScript. Okay. All right. Let me see why this failed. Expected line 21 app.js.
I think you're missing a fragment.
Yeah. Okay. There we go. All right, so it takes a little to spin up. There it comes. Cool. So you saw the loading and that came on the first paint. And then during the rehydration, the data came available and it transitioned the lazy component in place of the fallback. Let's go to our render and well, let's go to this page first. It starts back up. And look at the network. Okay. So you can see it after, even with the cache disabled, it's still getting the image on the server side. So you're getting that suspense functionality on the server side as well as on the client side. And what's really important about that is, let's say, here we only have one suspense item, but let's say your page is calling multiple different components. You can wrap each one of those components in suspense, and one will not be blocking the other. So if two of those components are done, they'll show, while the other two will show spinners. And before, you would have to wait for them all to resolve before the page became interactive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, do you put them all in the same suspense, like root element, like same suspense parent?
No, you would create a different suspense for each section. So you would have, kind of like that.
Okay.
So I'm going to try to slow it down a little bit. That's pretty cool. So we'll just put it to 5,000 and now you should, well, it's got to restart. There we go. Make sure I disabled the cache. Yeah, it's disabled. Okay. Maybe I need to restart. Let's see. I figured that would slow it down a little bit, but maybe not. Let me see if I can't. There we go. So the React team has put together a much better demo with this stuff that I invite you to look at. They've got this demo site, and you see the comments loading, but everything else paints. And the one thing that they have that I was unable to implement is what's called HTML streaming. So with HTML streaming, they're able to start taking advantage of the HTML as it comes in chunks. And they do that instead of the render to string function that we called. They have a new method in version 18 called pipe to node writable. And pipe to node writable will take your component, the response object, And then this object here, which will, this on ready to stream, will actually start to send your content down the wire and this start writing. And so it will actually chunk all your HTML up and send it down the wire. And the hydrate function can take advantage of that. So as soon as HTML is presented, it can wire up that HTML. So you no longer get the challenge where everything is kind of visible, but you can't really do anything until the entire page loads. I assume that I'm doing something wrong not to get it to work in Deno, but I wasn't able to find it. And again, this is alpha software, so it quite possibly could be something changed from the time that this demo was written in the time that I wrote my little demo. But that's the gist. But I do think that even just this piece that I implemented showing the suspense has some value. Most likely, you know, if you use a tool like Next.js or Remix or Astro or whatever, they're going to implement this for you, and you won't have to worry about some of these internal moving pieces, but you could just, you know, use Suspense, use your data provider, etc. And away you go. But I do think it's worth looking at to see how kind of this happens behind the scenes and see how it comes together. I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, it is cool.
Any questions?
I don't know that I have any specific questions about it. Definitely seems like a pretty cool and useful thing to be able to sort of send those components as they're ready, server side. Thinking of things that I can do with that for other parts of the tech team that I work with that don't do as much hands-on JavaScript stuff.
Yeah, and it really is kind of a three-part journey. The one part was getting Suspense stable. The second part is getting server-side rendering and Suspense stable. And then the third part is getting server components, or really the data fetching side of all of this, those APIs stable. So I think over time, in the next 2 years, or however long it takes to get those three pieces in, that's where it's going to be a game changer, is with all three of those pieces. But at the same time, if you keep up, then it won't be such a huge change to get there in the future. So I think that's what their strategy is to try to roll these things out without, you know, really breaking everybody. So they're sort of creating this React legacy. So once 18 is released, you're either React legacy or you're modern React. And that may generate some confusion, but it does seem like they're really trying to think about how to roll this out without breaking everybody.
So you think in general, near future, just server-side rendering React will be more of the norm than just sending all of it and rendering it client-side?
Yeah, I think with the new apps that they're targeting, you know, with Gatsby and Next.js and all the, you know, kind of focus on that, and they're, you know, really kind of moving towards the e-commerce space and some of the other spaces that really requires kind of that server-side rendering. But if you're not, in that, just doing the client side, will always still work, and it'll work fine, I think. But I do see all the frameworks, kind of coming with a server-side rendering solution in the box, and static side generation solution in the box as well. SSG. Trip, any questions from you? Is that helpful?
I have questions. Thanks.
Cool. Well, thanks guys for tuning in, and hope you have a great afternoon, and I'll talk to you next time.
You too. Great demo.
Thanks. Bye.